Hey there, I'm Samara Lynn. I'm the digital manager at Black Enterprise Magazine, and I am here with Joy Reid, who is an MSNBC host and political commentator. And Joy is currently on tour with her new book, I believe your second book?
It's my third, if you count the one I did with E.J. Dionne.
Okay, so her third book, The Man Who Sold America, Trump and the Unraveling of the American Story. And I'm sure we got a lot to talk about that. Kirkus Reviews called it a well-researched narrative. And the New York Times wrote that Reid argues that President Trump's administration is characterized by grift and venality that demeans the office and diminishes America. What I want to know is, how does the book differ from the topics you cover so extensively, so in depth on your show? What are your fans going to get out of this book that they might not get from the TV show?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And you know, I think the difference between reading the book and what we do every week is that every week you're in the fire hose. So every weekend we get there, and what used to be, you know, a weekend used to be kind of a sleepy time where we could kind of talk about what happened during the week, sort of analyze it. No, we're literally doing breaking news every weekend.
Right.
And so we're hitting them with so much of this information. It's so constant, it's every day. And so what I wanted to do with the book was just to give people sort of a minute to step back and kind of look at the big picture of what Donald Trump has done. Because it's so easy to forget the small details of the things that he's done that's hurt the country.
In your book, you also make the case that Trump supporters aren't heartlanders beset by economic anxieties, but their support comes from partisanship, race baiting, and animosity against immigrants and Muslims. Why do so many pundits talk about the economic anxieties of rural America and the heartlanders, but so few focus on the racism and the xenophobia that fuels Trump's base? Do you think that racism and xenophobia fueling the base tends to be ignored more by white political commentators?
Well, I'll tell you, I do a whole chapter on the media in the book where I interviewed media analysts. And their assessment of the way that the media treats Donald Trump is that, number one, there's an anthropological sort of aspect to the way that the DC and New York-based media view the rest of the country, forgetting that you know, urban America is America too. New York is America, Chicago is America, Detroit is America, but that's not what the media focuses on. They focus on the Midwest white working class voter, and they sort of kind of lionize them.
Right.
The heartland is never represented as New York City, even though there are more people in New York City than in all of Kansas. Right? So the idea is that that's not America. So I think it's partly that. The problem is the studies don't agree. The reasons that people voted for Trump were, number one, if they had economic anxiety and they relate that economic anxiety to people of color. If they say, the problems I'm having in my own economic life are the fault of immigrants, they voted for Trump. The people who voted for Trump either believed they were going to get things they like as Republicans, low taxes, deregulation. They had an authoritarian mindset toward the country. They felt that white men should be on top politically and culturally. They had anxiety about race and about demographic and racial change. They worried the country's becoming browner and blacker and that the country's moving away from them. Those are the reasons people voted for Trump.
In the book also, you make a really interesting comparison between the Trump administration and South Africa under Nelson Mandela's leadership. Can you just talk a bit about that?
If you look at South Africa's history, it's the most similar than any other country on earth to ours. The way it was founded, the fact that they enslaved the people that they found. When Europeans first came to the United States, they enslaved Native Americans, just as when white Europeans went to South Africa, they enslaved the black native people, the black indigenous people there. And then you had a situation that's upside down, where white South Africans were only 10% of the country, whereas here they were 90% of the country. So we see in South Africa this parallel to ourselves in a lot of ways, and then we see them trying to fix it. So since 1990, when the natural majority took over, which is gonna happen here. And so South Africa kind of offers a window of what that might look like. And then the other thing I think is more sort of kind of scary is that extremist white South Africans really have been talking to white Americans for a very long time. They've been talking to our far right wing and telling them, you better be careful. When your country goes majority non-white, you're gonna be like us. You're gonna lose power, you're gonna lose place in your country, you're gonna lose your country.
Why do you think Trump's base remains so loyal?
Well, I think that it shows the power of race and racial identity informing people's opinions about everything. There just was a Pew poll that just came out that showed that the most loyal base is still white evangelical Christians to Donald Trump. They're his most loyal base. Right. And it's because the priority among Trump's base really is an ethno-nationalist priority. They're the most desirous of having the country go back to the time when particularly white Christian men were on top culturally.
Let's talk about the Democratic debates. in your opinion, the winners and the losers?
I think the first night, it was clearly, there were two winners in the first night. Julian Castro, who I think did himself a lot of good in terms of raising his profile and showing that he can fight. He's always been seen as a very benign sort of candidate. He doesn't have a lot of fire. It didn't move him in the polls, which I found really interesting. I think he's one of the more interesting candidates who isn't doing well, but I thought he did very well. But I think clearly it was Elizabeth Warren. You come into the debate, you're the top dog in that first debate. You're the biggest name and no one attacks you. No one comes for you. No one puts a ding in you. You win. Okay, so that was clear. I think Cory Booker did well too, but first night, Elizabeth Warren. Second night, clearly Kamala Harris. You know, she came to fight. You know, the idea is if you're trying to become president, and you have to start eliminating people.
Right.
You can't all be friends, right? It's not a tea party, it's a competition. But the real person you have to get through to get that nomination is Joe Biden. And no one else really had the, you know, the guts to go for him, and she did. So I think she showed by attacking Joe Biden, A, that it can be done and that he won't necessarily get up off the mat easily. And she showed that she's willing to fight for the nomination, and she showed what she looks like as a prosecutor, which then says to people in their mind, well, that's what it would look like if she was debating for Trump.
One question you delve into in your book is you say whether America can overcome the damage Trump has inflicted.
Yeah.
And you really go into that here, but in the summary, the short answer, do you think America can overcome eventually the damage?
I hope so. You know, what really kind of distressed me in talking to people from around the country, whether it was from South Africa or from the Middle East or from in England, wherever I was, I just tried to talk to people about how they felt about us, not just Trump, but us. And what I got universally was that people felt that what Donald Trump showed is that there is no such thing as American exceptionalism. And I think after World War II, the reason the United States rose to leadership around the world is, first of all, we were the last man standing. Europe was devastated. We had to rebuild Europe. We had survived this great war that took down these great nations in Europe, these historic nations, and we came out on top. And part of the reason we were able to keep it was that we had this story we were telling, that America is this unique multiracial democracy. No other countries managed to be a functioning multiracial democracy, none, just us. You know, at the level that we've been able to do it. Right. And telling that story has helped us lead, and now Donald Trump has ruined that story. So I think the challenge after Trump is proving again that we're something different than everyone else, and that there's any reason to believe us rather than to believe China, who's saying, you see that? You can have capitalism without democracy, and look how much easier it works for us. And when they look at us and they see us in this decrepit position where we're fighting each other, where our own president is ripping our country apart, we don't have a story to tell the rest of the world that they have to believe. So I don't know how you get that back. Maybe by electing a president who has relationships and can get relationships with the leaders. Sure, Joe Biden is friends with all the leaders of Europe. Okay, that's great. But that doesn't say anything to the people. The people in these countries still look at us and they see Trump.